Today, we have a special treat for you as we turn the Evergreen Spotlight on the host of the podcast, Easy Conversations. Furkhan Dandia is a dedicated mental health advocate and therapist. The show dives into the human capacity to overcome adversity. I'm Julie Holliday, and welcome to this episode of Evergreen Spotlight. Furkhan, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're just curious of how you came up with the name Easy Conversations when it actually seems like you talk about very difficult topics. Where did that originate from and how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, the idea, there are difficult conversations, but I wanted to change the narrative around that because as people that are listening to the podcast, my goal is to allow them to think about, okay, if other people are having these conversations, maybe I can have them as well. And they don't necessarily need to be difficult or hard. Being vulnerable and sharing our story can not only allow us to feel more agency, but it can give other people hope as well. And that's kind of where the idea originated. I was having very similar, meaningful conversations with my friends, and it was really helping me in my journey at the time. And I felt that this could also help others. And that's kind of where the whole idea came. At the same time, I started my own business and coaching, and it was called Zen. So it was a bit of a play on words as well. So it all kind of fit together at the time.
And speaking of your story, what are some of the things that have brought you to being a mental health advocate? Can you share with us a bit about your background?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my background is actually in engineering. I work in corporate, have been doing so for 20 years. And at the halfway point, when I was about 30, I became a father, and I really started questioning my purpose in life. I didn't expect my purpose just being working for a corporate company. And at the time I had all these aspirations around getting different titles and different roles, but then all of that started to seem meaningless. Being a father, I felt like I had more responsibility now, and I wanted to do something that could shape my son's future, but how could I also change the world for him? And it didn't have to be something overly ambitious, but those were the things I started to think about at the time. And then when I was about 35, I went through a separation and divorce. And that's when my mental health really came to the forefront. There was a lot of stuff that I guess I had just swept under the rug, or I hadn't really thought about because I felt like, I'd been very successful in life. And so when I started to go through that process and I was seeking therapy just to navigate the divorce because I felt alone in it, I started to realize how much of my childhood was repeating itself, how much some of those childhood patterns I had and behaviors and maladaptive coping mechanisms I had picked up were continuing to repeat themselves and show up in my relationships. So there was that piece where I felt, men really struggle with this. How can I be a voice and an advocate? And I didn't know what that looked like at the time. And then, as I said, because I was going through divorce, I was starting to have deeper conversations with my friends and other men who were struggling in similar ways or had other struggles, whether it was financially related or related to their children or their relationships. And that's where I started to connect the dots where, okay, if all men can have similar conversations, then it could make things a lot easier for all of us as we're navigating this. We don't necessarily have to feel alone or have to do this alone and be in isolation. So that's where it all came together. And that's where the podcast was my way of putting something out there. And that was the initial focus, was around mental health, especially men's mental health, and have these intentional conversations with the hope of inspiring others and giving others the hope that you're not alone. There's someone else out there who's going through something, and maybe you can draw something from it. It doesn't have to be the exact same story. It doesn't have to be the same form of adversity, but there's something you can pick up and apply in your life. And that's what's helped me navigate all of this as well.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very vulnerable just about your separation and your divorce. We appreciate that vulnerability and honesty. And I'm wondering if you could share some tangible tips that we can take with us when it comes to our mental health and the various different topics of that umbrella. Like, what are some of the tips that you'd share?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. Every person kind of deals with it differently. For me, one of the many things that have helped is having a community. I've been fortunate enough to work with other men or have other men in my life that have really helped me. People in my life that I've been able to attract who've been really beneficial on my journey. But having that sense of community has really helped, of like-minded people. As I was navigating that experience of divorce, I started to realize that most of my social circle was based on some of the outside, the external validation, and it was very superficial at times. So I really had to navigate that and build a community that I felt was really serving me. And that's continued to be part of my internal audit every year, kind of looking at, okay, who am I surrounding myself with? Are we serving each other, or are we not? And there's no judgment there. It's just making sure you're aligning with the people and values that you surround yourself with. That would be the biggest thing. The other thing, and it sounds cliche, but is really believing in what you're doing and having that sense of purpose. That's really helped me. There's that Nietzsche saying that he who has a why can bear almost any how. I'm paraphrasing in a way, but that's kind of the idea that's really stuck with me, is figuring out what my why is, having that sense of purpose. And even though things were difficult, and they continue to be difficult at times, there's constant adversity, I've been able to push myself through, knowing that the bigger picture is something that I want to get to, and that's my why. So having that as well. And for me, faith has really helped. Believing in my faith and leaning into it at times when things have been difficult, prayer. And that could look like, it could be different for many people, right? It could be meditation. It could be whatever you want it to be, but finding that deeper sense of connection with something beyond yourself, whether it's society at large or the universe. I think that has served a huge purpose for me as well, and helped me navigate a lot of the difficult situations as they have come up.
Thank you for that reminder, and I'll second that. It's great. And with that, what sort of guests do you like to highlight on your show? What goes into your guest selection?
Yeah, I think majority of the times it's anyone who's willing to share their story. And I think the humans have evolved, right? We've evolved through storytelling, and there's so much power in that. And I think there was a reason why we continue to read some stories of the past that really get to us. And you see the same themes repeat themselves in movies. There's that whole hero's journey that we all seem to be attracted to, and always rooting for the underdog. So as people are navigating their adversity, they are able to dig deep and come out of it, and then somehow take those lessons and serve the world at large, or their community at large. And that doesn't have to be grand, right? Even if you're supporting one person and helping them, you're making a huge difference. So the guest selection really focuses on people who are able to not only share their story of adversity, but share practical tips, useful nuggets around what they were able to do and navigate those journeys. So that's one area. I've been able to expand a little bit on the different topics I'm covering within the podcast. I'll often have mental health advocates and experts also come on and share some practical tips on the other side as well. So it's a bit of mix when it comes to those things, but that's what's really helped, is anyone who can share a story of how they were in a situation where they were dealing with adversity, whatever that looked like, and how they were able to come out of it.
Do you have a specific episode of Easy Conversations in mind that sticks out as your favorite?
Yeah, I think there's many reasons why this sticks out. It was early in terms of when I had started the podcast, but I have a friend who grew up in a residential school in Canada. And for people that aren't aware of residential schools, it was basically Indigenous kids that were put into the system. And so there was a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse in those schools. And essentially the goal was to rid these kids of their culture and indoctrinate them in whatever they determined to be the Canadian culture. So this friend of mine came and shared his story of all the abuse and trauma he had encountered growing up in those schools, and how that led him to use alcohol as a vice and as a numbing tool throughout his life, and how he was able to then become sober. And at the time he was 3 years sober. And I think that was my favorite because he trusted me with his story. It was his first time actually going public and sharing something. And it's obviously allowed him to come out of it and make so much out of it too. But I think it was an amazing experience for both of us, where I was given this honor of sharing his story and being able to put in a position where he shared that with me and he trusted in me. And then it also allowed his own healing as well for him to openly talk about something like that. So that will always be a special moment for me because of all of the reasons I've mentioned, and the fact that it brought something to the forefront that we necessarily in our culture, in our country's history, we haven't really talked about much for many reasons. And it's unfortunate.
You were able to, through your platform, build awareness, and it's very cool. Now, what about the getting help stigma, do you think? What are some of the things that you wish, people knew about really seeking help or therapy with their mental health?
Well, I think there's still a significant stigma around it, as you've touched on. There's fear, right, for a lot of people. And one of the things as a therapist I remind myself is meeting people where they are. Not everyone's ready to jump all in and start talking about childhood trauma and start looking at everything that's happened. It takes time. It's a bit of a progression as well. And that's why you have to meet people where they are. And I tend to apply that even outside the therapy room, even outside my clients, or even outside the people that are seeking therapy, because everyone's figuring it out on their own. They're on their individual journey. I have a lot of people in my life that could really benefit from therapy because they often are navigating things that they are still struggling to bring to the forefront. But that's their journey. And as a friend or a loved one, my role is to just be there for them unconditionally and be supportive. So I think, unfortunately, there is that stigma with therapy, but we're getting better the more we're talking about this. And this is kind of the other reason why I like to do the podcast and have guests who are willing to talk about these things, because they're sharing how they were able to get help. And that help can look different for many people. It doesn't always have to be therapy, but that's the idea, is to normalize some of these things. And one of the ways I've been able to also influence that is a friend of mine and we started a men's group during the pandemic. And for me, it was a way of giving back. That was my initial intention. But then the more I was involved in that and attending these group sessions, I was also getting so much out of it because I didn't realize how much I needed it during the pandemic and how much I was struggling at times. So that's another way we've been able to cultivate these conversations. And a lot of the guys that come to these group sessions aren't necessarily seeking therapy, but they are finding a way to just share whatever's going on in their life, have that shared sense of community, have that trust and safety amongst other men, but at least they don't feel alone. So there's other ways of going about it as well. It doesn't always have to be therapy. But yeah, I would encourage people to seek those things out as well.
Thank you. Let's enter into a quick little round of rapid fire questions before we end. And so really just whatever you think about this, whatever comes to mind, you can take a breath if you need to, for sure. What is your view on platforms such as BetterHelp?
I think they are serving a purpose. They, they are sponsoring the Easy Conversations podcast, and I think it's great that I've been able to build that partnership with them as well. It does give people a different way of seeking therapy. A lot of people, like I said, don't have the time or the flexibility to go see a therapist in person. Sometimes therapists I've heard in different parts of the world or even in North America can be in remote locations. So it's not always feasible to drive or commute to go see your therapist. Sometimes you struggle to find a good fit, especially if you're trying to find a therapist locally. BetterHelp actually allows to navigate that, and they match you up with a therapist that may be a better fit for you. And if it's not, they have that flexibility to work with you to find someone. So it may not be the one all solution, but I think it is serving a purpose where we need more of this support, especially in the world we're in right now and the struggle people are experiencing.
It's come out now that there are chatbots like AI that can help you with therapy. What is your take on that?
Again, my view is it depends on the person, right? If you're struggling with something and you just need different ideas or a different perspective on how to navigate it, it could serve a purpose as well. But the power of therapy, I really believe, is having that in-person. Even if it's over a Zoom call or if it's remote, you're still talking to an individual and you're engaging in a conversation. And I think that's really what's powerful. Ultimately, talk therapy, the idea is you're getting to the solution yourself by talking through it. And that's why, I think even in the non-secular world, there was the idea of confession, which really served a purpose. So I think the idea is the same there, to be able to talk through it. And a chatbot may not serve that purpose. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. And again, it may depend on what type of help you're needing or what type of situation you're trying to navigate. It could be a quick, easy fix, but it may not be the right solution at times.
What if someone cannot afford therapy?
Well, there's different opportunities out there. I know when I was doing my practicum last year, I was working with a non-for-profit, and what they provided was pay whatever you can. So there was no fees. A lot of people who weren't in the financial situation to be able to pay for therapy didn't pay. So there are other ways of getting therapy. A lot of agencies also offer a sliding scale. So depending on what your salary is, they can adjust your fees to make it more affordable. So there's different ways of going about it for sure. You just need to seek it out, and different places may have different opportunities as well. But I do know in the non-for-profit sector, there are opportunities where people that can't afford it can be given some flexibility on how to seek therapy.
This has been such a great episode of awareness and inspiration. Furkhan, thank you for joining us and for giving us all of that information.
Yeah, well, no, this was great. Thank you so much for having me here and giving me the opportunity to share my story as well.
And to our listeners, if you want to hear more easy conversations, you can tune in for brand new episodes so that you never miss out. I'm Julie Holliday. This is Evergreen Spotlight.